expenditure focus of budget this year in the speech presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman very broadly has been on rural, it's been on infrastructure, it's been on energy transition, and it's been on welfare. How will all of this expenditure really play out on the ground and keep India on its growth path? We're very pleased to have TV Narendran, past President CII and CEO and Managing Director of Tata Steel. Mr. Narendran, appreciate your time here on BQ Prime. Absolute pleasure to have you here. Let's get straight to it. Your big takeaways from the budget speech and the budget documents.
Thanks, Manvi, for having me on the show. I think it's been a great budget in many ways. Firstly, for consistency of focus for the last 3 years, there's been a focus on infrastructure. As CII and as industry, we've been asking for it because the focus on infrastructure has a huge multiplier effect. It creates demand for multiple industries, whether it's steel, cement, automobiles, construction equipment, so on and so forth, creates employment across the country, and also helps us as industry because it reduces the logistics costs, which in India is higher than it is in other countries. So I think there's been a consistency in focus and a significant increase in the allocation. Secondly, I think this budget has been very comprehensive. It's also dealt with consumption. It's dealt with the rural economy, like you said. It's also tried to simplify taxes, try to address the ease of doing business, and also plan for the future in terms of the green transition. So I think it's addressed the short-term issues while at the same time giving the fiscal discipline that was required. So in many ways, I think it's difficult to find fault in this budget.
I think there is, at one level, astonishment that there wasn't more populism in this budget in some sense, given that it's the last full budget before a general election in 2023. And so on the flip side, there's great appreciation of the commitment to fiscal discipline, given an uncertain global environment in which India sits. Mr. Narendran, you know, the focus on infrastructure, the focus on capital expenditure, sure, we get that piece of the story. But how will it, play out in terms of industry sentiment to actually invest more? The government has been doing all of the heavy lifting in the recent 2 years, and it seems it's going to have to do more of that in 23-24 as well. What is contained in the budget that will spur private sector investment?
Sure. So, Manvi, if you really look at it, private sector investment happens when a few things happen, right? First is there needs to be growth in demand. I think, and we went through a tough period even before the pandemic. If you really look at many sectors, the demand had dipped, whether you look at the automobile industry or many others. So one is the demand is back. That's positive. Secondly, the profitability is back for many industries because demand is back, capacity utilization is good. Thirdly, I think before the pandemic or leading to the pandemic, we had inflated balance sheets, a lot of debt on the balance sheets, and that's also got repaired a lot. The bank balance sheets have also been repaired. So I think the health of the economy from an ability to invest point of view is much better than it was earlier. And I think private sector investment is happening. The other thing is, sometimes we look at credit growth and assume that private sector investment is not happening. But many companies, including ours, we are deleveraging as well as investing, because we are trying to repair our balance sheets. We have the cash flows to deleverage while at the same time making investments. So if you look at Tata Steel, even in the last year, we spent 12,000 crores acquiring Nilachal, which is, which was part of the divestment. Plus, we spent another 8,000-10,000 crores, or we are spending 8,000-10,000 crores on growth capex and sustenance capex. So I think the investments are there, may not be as visible, but I think it's certainly coming back, in my view.
Okay, the production-linked incentives, I know it's early days, but there's been a lot of excitement and hope pinned around that. And to some extent, and I will have to admit here that it's always important to read the budget documents to really see if there's more of that sort of support that has been extended by the government. But on the face of it, the PLI that was on offer, well, that's what's on offer, nothing more, nothing, no sort of expansion of that to other sectors. Is that potentially an area of disappointment for your peer group?
Well, I think the existing PLI schemes are addressing a wide range of sectors. As steel industry, there's only about 6,000 crores for specialty steel. So I won't talk about that. But if you look at automobile with a 50,000 crore allocation, and you see the impact it has had on electronics manufacturing. So I think in many ways, the PLI scheme has helped galvanize investments in India for sectors which needed that support, right? So I think that's positive. One area which we've been asking for as CII is maybe more PLI and employment-intensive sectors. Electronics manufacturing is employment-intensive, but even sectors like textile could do with some PLI because they create a lot of employment. So maybe we probably need not limit ourselves to the budget document because some of these announcements can also be made during the year. But that's been one of the asks of CII.
Indeed, it has. In fact, quite directly an employment-linked incentive scheme, as you articulated. Rural demand, a little bit of weakness in the rural economy per se, and rural demand, again, has been an ask. What can the government do to really strengthen rural demand? This is coming straight from the Confederation of Indian Industry in its representations before the budget. Put the pieces that you saw of the rural focus in this budget, which give you hope that this matter has been addressed.
I think there's a lot of focus on agriculture, where agriculture has grown at some 3%, which is good. So there's a lot of focus, not just on agriculture, but also the kind of agriculture that we want to do. There's also a lot of focus on increasing entrepreneurship and, in the rural economy. I think that's positive. A lot of the states are also spending on rural infrastructure, and I think that's another big positive thing. But having said that, if you really look at rural consumption, one of the reasons why it has dropped in the last 2-3 years is because households have spent more on medical expenses than they planned to because of COVID, right? And people are, in some sense, saving for any eventuality. And I think the focus on health expenditure, that's gone to about 3% of GDP, which is pretty much double of what it was a few years back. I think that is a long-term solution. People should have access to health facilities in an emergency particularly, or even otherwise. And that's the best way for us to trigger rural consumption or revive rural consumption. So I think steps are being taken in the short term, as well as addressing the long-term issues which need to get addressed.
I was listening to the Prime Minister a short while ago. This was post the budget speech, where he said, impetus has been given to green growth and a green economy. Do you see enough impetus on that front?
I think we have obviously moved quite well, quite fast in that direction over the years, made commitments on having a greater share of renewables in our grid as energy sources. I think all that is positive. The recent incentives for hydrogen, again, is positive. But I think, obviously, we need to do more and more in this area because transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables is a very costly and complex transition, as, for instance, Europe is discovering, because they were ahead of everybody else. But it's not going to happen so easily. You need infrastructure framework, you need a policy framework, you need carbon border adjustment mechanisms. There are multiple things that you need to have in place because it's going to be expensive. Industry by itself cannot do this transition without support from the government. And you also need customers to be incentivized to buy green products. They need to be willing to pay more to buy green products if required.
Absolutely.
So all these things need to come together, but I think we're taking steps in the right direction. As CII, we've been representing to the government, and I think the government is also looking at it in a more holistic way, and I think we'll get there.
Okay, one final question. Anything that you're sore about that wasn't in the budget, basically a miss that has led to disappointment?
Well, like I said, maybe PLI for employment-intensive sectors, like we talked about textiles. While I didn't see divestment in the speech, I didn't hear divestment in the speech of the finance minister, but I did see some numbers in the document, because I think that's another way for us to unlock value from assets we've already invested in as a country. So I think the last few years has also shown that any of the assets which the government has divested has unlocked a lot of value in the hands of the private sector. I think that's another thing which probably we need to see more of.
Well, it could be pretty much an off-budget initiative that plays out as far as divestment is concerned, although we do see a little bit of a moderation or tempering of targets on the divestment front. Mr. Narendran, I'm going to leave it at that. Appreciate your time and insights here on BQ Prime.
Thank you, Manvi.